Military Freefall Emergency Procedures for BOC Operations Instructor Version. All procedures presented in this video come from Army Techniques Publication 3-18.11, Special Forces Military Freefall Operations Chapter 9, dated 28 April 2020. It is intended for use as a review of select RA-1 BOC system emergency procedures for experienced military freefall parachutists. If there are any conflicts between the procedures in this video and the most current ATP, the ATP takes precedence. Emergency procedures prior to exit. Aircraft emergencies on the ground and prior to takeoff. Take all commands from the Jumpmaster, exit the aircraft and assemble 100 meters in a safe direction and report to the Jumpmaster for a head count. After takeoff to 1,000 feet. 6 short rings of the alarm bell or verbal warning from the aircrew will alert jumpers to prepare for a crash landing. 1 long continuous bell or verbal warning will indicate that a crash is imminent. Fasten seatbelts and assume the emergency landing position. Wait for the aircraft to come to a complete stop, then unbuckle. Exit the aircraft and assemble 100 meters in a safe direction and report to the Jumpmaster for a head count. Emergency bailout 1,001 to 3,000 feet. 3 short rings of the alarm bell or a verbal warning will alert jumpers to prepare for bailout. The Jumpmaster will give the bailout signal with a clenched fist over his reserve handle and thrust it out to the side. On the Jumpmaster's command, jumpers will clear the aircraft and deploy the reserve canopy. Emergency bailout 3,001 feet and above. 3 short rings of alarm bell or verbal warning will alert jumpers to prepare for an emergency bailout. The Jumpmaster will give the bailout signal with a clenched fist over his main ripcord handle pocket and thrust it out to the side. On the Jumpmaster's command, jumpers will dive out opposite heading of the jumper in front of them, clear the aircraft and deploy the main canopy with no more than a 5-second delay. Altimeter failure prior to exit. Notify the Jumpmaster and swap with an onboard spare. Note: the jumper can exit the aircraft only in an emergency. Premature activation of pilot chute inside the aircraft. With the ramp door closed, shout "pilot chute," contain it, and notify the Jumpmaster to ensure the ramp or doors do not open. If the pilot chute activates or the container comes open, the container will be closed and the jumper will be seated, will fasten seatbelt, and will not jump. With the ramp or doors open, shout "pilot chute," attempt to contain it, and notify the Jumpmaster. Once the parachute is contained, the jumper will move away from the open exit to a safe area forward in the aircraft. If the pilot chute or parachute is pulled outside the aircraft, the jumper and jumpers in front of the jumper must exit immediately. Warning: if a parachutist is standing in the vicinity of an open door or ramp and experiences a premature deployment, try to contain it. If any portion of the parachute goes out of the aircraft, exit immediately to minimize or avoid serious injury. Emergency procedures during exit. Jumper in tow. The Jumpmaster will try to free. If the jumper is unconscious, the Jumpmaster will attempt to pull the jumper inside the aircraft. Collision on exit. The jumper will maintain his arch and gently push off the other jumper with an open hand. Regain stability, check altimeters, handles, and continue the freefall as planned. Do not grab any part of the other jumper if contact is made. Emergencies during freefall. Spinning. Arch, counter the spin. If spinning out of control and unable to maintain altitude awareness, wave off and pull. Tumbling. Arch, check hands and feet. If tumbling out of control and unable to maintain altitude awareness, wave off and pull. Entering a cloud or loss of visibility. Stop all movement and return to a stable, relaxed arch. Maintain altitude awareness. Pull at the prescribed altitude even if you are still in the cloud. Lost or loose goggles. Make 1 attempt to replace them. If unsuccessful, squint and continue the freefall as planned. Maintain altitude awareness and pull at the prescribed altitude. Altimeter failure or lost altimeter during freefall. During both day and night operations, observe other jumpers and pull when they do. If no other jumpers can be observed, clear your airspace, wave off and pull. Rucksack shifts. Counter any turns caused by the rucksack shifting in freefall by turning in the opposite direction. Try to maintain control of the ruck. If unable to maintain altitude awareness, wave off and pull. Collision avoidance during freefall. Remember that the lower jumper has the right of way. Never get over the top of another jumper. Premature parachute opening. First, determine which parachute has activated. The main parachute has the 3-ring assembly, deployment bag, and pilot chute. There will be no 3-ring assembly or snowman on reserve risers, no deployment bag, no pilot chute, and no trim tabs on risers. Conduct a controllability check and continue as planned. Pull priorities. Pull. Never sacrifice altitude for stability. Post-exit emergency procedures. Malfunction types are as follows. High-speed malfunction. When the ripcord has been pulled, the deployment bag remains in the container. Low-speed malfunctions. Container assembly opens, but canopy does not fully or properly deploy. Cutaway decision altitude. 2,500 feet for high-speed and low-speed malfunctions. Warning: you must cut away the main parachute before pulling the reserve handle. This section is a class participation activity. At this time, all jumpers please stand and follow along with the demonstrator. Arch. Counter with left hand. Look red, grab red, pull red, throw away. Counter with right hand. Look yellow, grab yellow, pull yellow, throw away. Check over right shoulder to ensure the reserve pilot chute deploys. Please have a seat. Total malfunctions. Only 2 attempts will be made to clear total malfunctions. Note: your first attempt is made during normal pull procedures. Hard pull. If the initial pull is unsuccessful, reset and try again. Jumpers may use right elbow on the side of the container as leverage when pulling the pilot chute from the BOC. If unsuccessful, execute cutaway procedures. Failure to locate or missing pilot chute handle. Maintain arch and use the right hand to trace up the thigh and sweep up to the bottom of the container to attempt to locate the pilot chute handle. If unsuccessful, execute cutaway procedures. Partial malfunctions. Horseshoe or bag lock. Execute cutaway procedures immediately. No attempt will be made to clear these partial malfunctions. Pilot chute entangled with right arm. Attempt to untangle it by using a swimming motion to remove the bridle from the arm. If unsuccessful, perform cutaway procedures. Pilot chute hesitation and pilot chute in tow. After pull, check over the right shoulder. Look over the right shoulder a second time to disrupt the partial vacuum to clear the burble. If the main parachute does not deploy, perform cutaway procedures. Post-opening emergency procedures. Note: cutaway procedures must be initiated by 2,500 feet. Streamer and/or snivel. Pull the toggles down to the full brake position and hold for 3 to 4 seconds. Let up slowly to the 50% brake setting. If the malfunction is not clear, make one more attempt to pull the toggles down to the full brake position for 3 to 4 seconds. If the malfunction is still not cleared, perform cutaway procedures. Line over. Conduct a canopy controllability check. If the canopy is uncontrollable, initiate cutaway procedures. Note: cutaway procedures must be initiated by 2,500 feet. Line twists. Reach up with both hands, thumbs pointed downward, and separate the risers. Use a bicycle motion or kick with both legs in the opposite direction of the twist to untwist the lines. Do not unstow the brakes until the line twists are cleared. Maintain altitude awareness, and if unable to clear twists, or if twists are still above the cascade by 2,500 feet, initiate cutaway procedures. Hung slider. If the slider remains above the cascades, it will deform the canopy, degrade lift, and drive performance to an unacceptable level. Pull both rear risers vigorously to move the slider downward. Unstow the brakes and pull vigorously to bring the slider down completely if the rear risers are not successful. The slider must travel at least halfway down past the suspension line cascades before attempting a canopy controllability check. If unable to clear the slider past the cascades, or if unable to pass a canopy controllability check by 2,500 feet, initiate cutaway procedures. Closed-end cells. Pull the toggles down to full brake position, hold for 4 seconds, and let up quickly. Repeat the procedure if end cells do not open. Conduct a canopy controllability check. If the canopy is uncontrollable, cut away. Pilot chute over the nose. Attempt to flip the pilot chute back over the top of the canopy by bringing the toggles to full brakes and let the toggles up abruptly. Conduct a canopy controllability check. If the canopy is uncontrollable, cut away. Tension knots. Stop the turn with opposite rear riser input. Snap the riser of the affected line group by pulling down and releasing. After 2 attempts, release the toggles and come to a full brake position and hold for 3 to 4 seconds, then let up slowly. After 2 attempts, conduct a canopy controllability check. If the canopy is uncontrollable, cut away. Broken suspension lines. If suspension line breaks during opening, stop the turn with rear riser input. It may be difficult to identify the broken lines and the canopy may look deformed. Conduct a canopy controllability check. If the canopy is uncontrollable, cut away. If there are 2 or more broken lines, or if there are any A lines broken, immediately cut away. Rips or tears. If the rips or tears are in the bottom skin of the canopy, check rate of descent with other jumpers. If descending faster than the other jumpers, execute cutaway procedures. If not descending faster than the other jumpers, conduct a canopy controllability check. If the rip or tear is in the top skin of the canopy, execute cutaway procedures. Premature brake release. Release the opposite toggle. Conduct a canopy controllability check. If the canopy is uncontrollable, cut away. Broken control lines. Release the good control line. Steer using the good control line and opposite rear riser. At a safe altitude, determine the flare point using only the rear risers. The canopy responds much quicker when using the rear risers. Flare and land using both rear risers only. Entering a cloud under canopy. Stop all turns and stay alert. Use 50% brakes. Maintain heading and pick up reference points if possible prior to entering the cloud. Maintain altitude and air awareness. Dual canopy deployment emergencies. Downplane. Ensure both canopies are not entangled by tracing all 8 risers and suspension lines through their sliders to their respective canopies. Pull the main canopy release handle, red cutaway pillow, with your right hand. If the canopies are entangled or below 1,000 feet, steer the most controllable canopy toward the other with the rear risers. Attempt to steer the 2 canopies together to get them overhead. Make all turns gently toward the other canopy. Do not attempt to flare either or both canopies. Just land them as they are and conduct a parachute landing fall or PLF. Side by side. Ensure canopies are not entangled by tracing all 8 risers through the sliders to respective lines and canopies. Risers should be free and clear. Do not release the brakes on either canopy. If brakes are released on one canopy, fly at half brakes to match forward speed of the other canopy. If canopies are not entangled, place the left hand on the left rear riser of the left canopy. Place the right hand on the red cutaway pillow. Separate the canopies into a down plane with the left hand on the left rear riser of the left canopy. Peel and pull the red cutaway pillow to full arm extension and let go of the riser and cutaway handle simultaneously. If the canopies are entangled or if unsure whether they are entangled or below 1,000 feet, steer the best looking canopy with the rear risers. Gently turn toward the other canopy to prevent a downplane configuration. Do not attempt to flare and be prepared for a PLF. Biplane. Ensure both canopies are not entangled by tracing each of the 8 risers and suspension lines through its respective sliders to its respective canopy. Separate the canopies into a side-by-side. Use the left rear riser of the left canopy to separate canopies into a downplane. Release the rear riser of the left hand as the cutaway pillow is pulled with the right hand. If the canopies are entangled or below 1,000 feet, steer the front canopy with the rear risers, making all turns gently. The trailing canopy will follow. Make all turns gently in either direction, preventing canopies from going into a downplane. Steer into the wind if possible. Do not attempt to flare either or both canopies. Just land them as is and conduct a PLF. Partially deployed reserve. Do not unstow the brakes. If the brakes have already been unstowed, slow the main to prevent the reserve from fully deploying. If the canopy begins to inflate, make sure the suspension lines or risers do not become entangled with you or your equipment. Allow the canopies to settle into a configuration. Continuously inspect the canopies and lines for entanglements. Ensure both canopies are not entangled by tracing the risers and suspension lines to their respective canopies. If not entangled, use the rear risers to configure the canopies into a side-by-side configuration. Follow side-by-side procedures. If the canopies are entangled or below 1,000 feet, fly the most controllable canopy with the rear risers, making all turns gently toward the other canopy. If the reserve is still in the deployment bag, carefully gather and coil the suspension lines in one hand while lifting the bagged canopy to secure the reserve from inflating. Attempt to prevent the locking stows from popping open and allowing the reserve canopy to slide out of the deployment bag. Continue until the bagged canopy is in hand. Maintain a firm grip on the bagged canopy. Steer the main canopy by leaning in the harness or reaching up with one hand to make rear riser turns. At 15 feet, drop the bagged canopy to the ground and flare the canopy with the rear risers while simultaneously conducting a PLF. If no equipment worn, maintain positive control of the reserve canopy and secure between the legs or knees to prevent it from inflating. Fly and flare as normal. Canopy entanglements. Entanglement with another jumper. Always attempt to steer clear of other jumpers. The lower jumper has the right of way. If a collision with another jumper is imminent, steer to avoid body-to-body contact and assume the modified spread eagle position. Protect the emergency handles with the left arm and attempt to bounce off the other jumper's canopy and/or suspension lines. If entanglement occurs, stay calm and do not grab the cutaway pillows. Check the altitude and look for the other jumper. Assess the situation before acting in any way. Communication between jumpers and altitude awareness are critical to successful disentanglement. Communicate positive commands only, such as, "Hold on to me," or 4,000 feet, are you okay? Only use the word cutaway when the other jumper should cut away. If covered in fabric, assume that you are the higher jumper and probably have a good canopy above that is supporting both jumpers. If you intend to cut away, use the words, "I'm executing emergency procedures." Entanglements above 2,000 feet. If the higher jumper has a good canopy, attempt to clear the entanglement while protecting the emergency handles or pillows. If possible, the jumper should follow their suspension lines out of the entanglement. If the entanglement can be cleared, the lower canopy should reinflate within 150 to 200 feet. Both jumpers should complete a canopy controllability check and inspect their parachutes and harnesses thoroughly for damage, then decide whether it is safe to continue to fly and land. If the canopy cannot be cleared, the engulfed jumper fails to respond, appears to be going unconscious, or the altitude is approaching 2,000 feet, the lower jumper should communicate his intention to cut away by saying, 2,000 feet, followed by, "I'm executing emergency procedures." The jumper should then initiate cutaway procedures by 2,000 feet after disconnecting his reserve static line, or RSL. The higher jumper should clear the canopy from his face and controls so that he can see and steer the canopy. He should continue to clear the canopy if possible, keeping his cutaway pillows protected. If the canopy cannot be cleared safely, the jumper should fly slowly with brakes to diminish the drag of the other canopies and the potential for interference in flight and control. Entanglements between 2,000 and 1,000 feet. Jumpers should communicate altitudes and positive commands, such as 1,500 feet, hold on to me, or 1,000 feet, I've got you. The lower jumper has two options. He can perform cutaway procedures after disconnecting his RSL, or he can land with the higher jumper. If the lower jumper decides to land with the higher jumper, the lower jumper should jettison his combat equipment if worn. The higher jumper should maintain control of the lower parachutist and fly the final approach at half brakes if possible. The higher jumper lands at full brakes, both jumpers should execute a PLF. Entanglements below 1,000 feet. The higher jumper should make every effort to maintain the lower jumper's canopy. The higher jumper should maintain control of the lower jumper and fly the final approach at half brakes if possible. The lower jumper should jettison his combat equipment if worn. Both jumpers should be prepared to execute a PLF. If neither jumper has a good canopy, attempt to establish communications, such as altitudes and positive commands. If both canopies are uncontrollable and/or collapsed, it may be difficult to establish which jumper is higher or lower, and it may be alternating repeatedly. If a jumper is entangled in lines, that jumper should attempt to free himself and cut away first. The lower jumper should cut away after the higher jumper. The higher jumper could be fatally engulfed in the lower jumper's lines and canopy if the lower jumper cuts away first. If impact with the ground is imminent, both jumpers should deploy their reserve to increase the amount of fabric exposed and the extra drag created. If both reserve canopies deploy, both jumpers perform cutaway to clear from entanglement and prevent a downplane. Hazardous landing procedures. Tree or cactus landings. Attempt to steer away. If unable, jettison combat equipment if already lowered. If not, leave it attached for added protection. Keep your goggles over your eyes and oxygen mask on if worn. Turn the canopy into the wind and attempt a vertical descent between the trees if growth is sparse. If in dense trees, attempt to cap your canopy on top of the trees or catch the canopy on the thickest branches. Protect your face with your forearms. Keep your feet and knees together and be prepared to execute a PLF. If you are suspended and cannot climb down, wait for assistance. Water landings. Attempt to steer away. If unable to avoid water, attempt to land as close to shore as possible. Jettison your combat equipment and oxygen mask if worn. Unhook your RSL, unfasten your chest strap and waistband. Land into the wind and flare as normal. Be prepared to do a PLF in case the water is shallow. After you have entered the water, release your leg straps, arch out of the harness, and swim free of the harness and suspension lines. If you are being dragged, pull the red cutaway pillow. If you are trapped under the canopy, follow a seam to the edge. If you need to breathe, form a triangle with your hands, push up on the fabric enough to create an air pocket. Wire landings. Attempt to steer away. If unable to avoid wires, disconnect your RSL, jettison your combat equipment, and turn off your oxygen if worn. Attempt to parallel the wires in a braked position to obtain a vertical descent through the wires. Be prepared to do a PLF in case you pass through the wires. If contact with the ground is made, cut away the main canopy and move away. If suspended, remain motionless until the power is cut off. Do not let anyone touch you and do not cut away. Note: if time and altitude permits, jettison the ruck, turn off the oxygen, and disconnect the O2 mask. Obstacles in the landing area. Look away, steer away. If unable to avoid the obstacle, jumpers attempt to contact with both feet and perform a PLF. High wind landings, 11 through 18 knots. Disconnect the RSL at 1,500 feet. Upon touchdown, release one toggle, pivot in the direction of the pulled toggle, and pull the other toggle hand over hand until the canopy collapses. Keep pulling until you contain the tail of the canopy. Note: if the jumper encounters extreme high winds under canopy before landing, the jumper should disconnect the RSL to keep the reserve from deploying when cutting away the main parachute if being dragged. Warning: use caution when disconnecting RSL below 1,500 feet. When disconnecting the RSL, serious injury or death may result if the yellow RSL connected to the snap shackle is pulled instead of the red static line release lanyard. Dust devils. Stay alert for signs of swirling or erratic wind conditions. Avoid turbulent air at all costs. If flying through a dust devil, go to full flight to build speed. If the canopy begins to collapse, quickly conduct a 12 to 24-inch cobra strike on the toggles to prevent the collapse. Depending on altitude, attempt this again until the canopy reinflates or landing is imminent. Be prepared to execute a PLF if close to the ground. If overtaken by a dust devil on the ground, gather up as much canopy as possible and lay down on it. After landing, if control of the canopy is lost, ensure the RSL is disconnected and pull the red cutaway pillow. Recovery from a drag. Release one toggle completely, pull the other toggle and steering line in hand over hand until the canopy collapses or canopy fabric is in hand. If unable to stand or collapse the canopy because of injury or other issues, disconnect the RSL, if not already disconnected, and pull the red cutaway pillow. Be safe, stay hydrated, and have a good jump. This has been a brief review of select RA-1 BOC parachute system emergency procedures for experienced military freefall parachutists. If there are any conflicts between the procedures presented in this video and the most current version of the ATP takes precedence. If you have any questions about the procedures presented in this video, please consult your unit Jumpmaster or Air Operations Specialist. This has been an F3EA production for the 68th Rescue Squadron, Guardian Angel Formal Training Unit, Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, Arizona, 2020.